West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel was first to report that while that real meeting of the real electors was happening inside the state capitol, fake electors were also meeting elsewhere in the same state capitol at the same time on the same day. Quote, an hour after the Wisconsin Supreme Court affirmed Joe Biden is the winner of the November 3rd presidential election in Wisconsin, Wisconsin Republicans refused to accept the result and met at the state capitol to put forward their own slate of electors, while 10 Democratic electors met inside Governor Tony Evers' office to finalize the state's 10 electoral votes for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Republicans convened to cast votes for President Donald Trump. What do you mean cast votes? The details on this are amazing. In Wisconsin, the Republicans did it privately, and I kid you not, they forged all the paperwork to make it seem like they were the real electors. Look, we have the paperwork that they forged. Look, certificate of the votes of the 2020 electors from Wisconsin. We, the undersigned, being the duly and qualified electors for President and Vice President of the United States of America from the state of Wisconsin, do hereby certify the following. A, that we convened and organized at the state capitol in the city of Madison, Wisconsin at noon on the 14th day of December 2020 to perform the duties enjoined upon us. B, that being so assembled and duly organized, we proceeded to vote by ballot and balloted first for president and then for vice president by distinct ballots. And C, that the following are all of the votes for president and all of the votes for vice president, so cast aforesaid. It all sounds very official, right? Until you get to this part. Who were the votes cast for? Donald J. Trump, number of votes, 10. Michael R. Pence, number of votes, 10. We, the duly and qualified electors? Yeah, then they all signed it as if this were a real thing. With all this official seeming language, in witness whereof, we, the undersigned, have hereunto at the Capitol in the city of Madison, Wisconsin on this 14th day of December, subscribed our respective names. And then indeed, there's all 10 of them signing their names to this forged document that says they're the real electors. And Wisconsin's electors cast the state's votes for Trump, even though Trump lost Wisconsin. And they didn't just do this to to LARP, right? They didn't do this to put it in a scrapbook to fantasize about what their alternate reality might have been like had Trump won. They actually submitted this forged documentation. Memorandum to the President of the United States Senate, to the Archivist of the United States, to the Wisconsin Secretary of State, to the Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court in the Western District of Wisconsin. These are all the places the actual electoral vote count is supposed to be submitted if you were real electors. They submitted theirs as if it were the real thing. Quote, pursuant to 3 U.S. Code Section 11, enclosed, please find Wisconsin's electoral votes for president and vice president. There was no such thing enclosed with that document. There was a forged document saying Wisconsin's electors voted for Trump, which was not true. Those were not real electors. These documents were forged to make it look like Wisconsin was officially saying Trump won the state when actually Biden did. It's amazing that they did that. And the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, who again had this scoop that the Republicans had done that secretly behind closed doors while the real electors were meeting down the hall, they had this prescient note toward the end of their reporting that day. Again, this is just over a year ago. This was December last year. Quote, the Electoral College votes now go to Congress, which will count them on January 6th. Vice President Mike Pence will preside over the tally. Some Republicans have raised the possibility of having members of Congress challenge the results of some states and try to shift votes to Trump. Yep, that's in fact what happened. And 10 Wisconsin Republicans agreed to impersonate the real electors from their state, and they provided a forged set of documents. So Republican electors from Wisconsin could be substituted for the real ones if the plan had worked. Inside Wisconsin, people who worry full-time about the democracy, and crucially, people who know what modern Wisconsin Republicans are like up close and personal, they have taken this very seriously. And they have tried this year to make sure that it not only wouldn't go unnoticed, but that there would be consequences for what the Republicans tried to do. Attorney Jeffrey Mandel with the Wisconsin legal group Law Forward, he wrote to the State Election Commission in Wisconsin and also to the Milwaukee County District Attorney, the prosecutor there, referring those 10 fake electors who forged that paperwork, referring them for potential prosecution. Quote, following the November 2020 election, 10 individuals impersonating the legally selected and authorized presidential electors of the state flouted the will of the people as expressed at the ballot box and fraudulently attempted to misappropriate Wisconsin's participation in selecting the next president of the United States. We write to you to request your assistance in investigating these events, in determining if they violate longstanding Wisconsin law, and helping deter others from ever attempting such a grave and brazen offense against our democracy. We write to draw your attention to the actions of these fraudulent electors. We request that your office immediately investigate the individuals responsible with an eye toward assessing whether criminal charges are appropriate. They then suggest some possible charges that might apply in this circumstance, including forgery, falsely assuming to act as a public officer, official misconduct, conspiracy, and others. It has been more than 10 months now since that referral was sent to the State Elections Commission and to the Milwaukee County District Attorney. We don't know if any criminal investigation was ever undertaken by the state prosecutor there. Certainly, there have been no public-facing charges that we've seen for any of those people who took part in the forgery and the fake electors scheme. I have to tell you, there, in fact, have really been no negative consequences at all for any of those 10 Republicans who signed their names to those forged documents. One of them, in fact, was appointed to serve on the state's election commission this year. He had previously been on it. They reappointed him to it this year. The State Election Commission is one of the entities that's supposed to be investigating whether the people who impersonated the state's electors ought to be prosecuted for having done so. So far, it seems like that guy doesn't think he should be prosecuted, nor does he apparently think that he should recuse himself from the Election Commission's decision on that matter. Why would I recuse myself? It's only about me. But what happens when a group of people trying to falsify election results face no consequences for trying it? Even when they went so far as to forge the documents they needed to try to pass themselves off as the real thing. What happens when there are no consequences for trying something like that? It just, drops down the memory hole and we all pretend it didn't happen. Well, in the case of Wisconsin and that state's Republicans, the metaphor you're probably looking for comes from the medical world. In the case of Wisconsin, when you ignore something like that and just pretend it didn't happen, it metastasizes. Here's what I mean by that. Here's the Washington Post on what's going on in Wisconsin now. Quote, one of the investigators re-examining the 2020 election results in Wisconsin on behalf of the Republican-led state legislature is the president of a group that unsuccessfully sued to overturn the election results. Another worked as a deputy in President Donald Trump's White House Presidential Personnel Office at the time that office was known for weeding out people perceived to be disloyal to President Trump. A third is an Arkansas lawyer who represented Trump's campaign during last year's Wisconsin recount, a process that confirmed President Biden won the swing state by roughly 21,000 votes. All of these people are being paid with Wisconsin taxpayer money as part of a legislative-backed investigation into the 2020 election results. An investigation that has picked up steam in recent weeks. The inquiry is the latest gambit by Republicans to re-examine the 2020 election nationally. It makes little pretense of neutrality in Wisconsin and is being led by figures who have shown allegiance to Trump or openly embraced false claims of fraud. The former president personally lobbied Republican state lawmakers to pursue the Wisconsin investigation and spurred on other ballot reviews around the country, leaning on legislators to revisit the vote more than a year after Americans went to the polls. In Wisconsin, a state that's likely to see some of the nation's most competitive races in 2022 for governor and U.S. Senate, there are now multiple efforts underway to scrutinize how the last election was run, including a recommendation by a county sheriff to prosecute and jail state election officials. Election experts say Wisconsin has now lapped Arizona as the leading front line in the war over the legitimacy of the 2020 election. This fall, the Racine County Sheriff recommended that 5 of the 6 members of the bipartisan Wisconsin Elections Commission should be criminally charged over rules they adopted last year after hours of debate at public meetings about how to handle absentee balloting at nursing homes during the pandemic. Separately, one Republican state rep has introduced a resolution calling for members of the State Elections Commission and the nonpartisan state administrator of elections to resign or else face efforts to remove them from office and to criminally investigate their activities. Another Republican representative has introduced a measure to decertify President Biden's win in the state, a move that drew both public praise and private encouragement from Trump, according to aides to the former president. Meanwhile, the head of the Republicans' legislative investigation recently asked a judge to order a county sheriff to jail the elected Democratic mayors of Green Bay and Madison, Wisconsin. The mayor of Madison, one of the targeted mayors, tells the Washington Post, quote, "It's both laughable and horrifying at the same time. We don't think there's any legal basis to this threat, but it's a threat. I think it's designed specifically to try to intimidate." You start by pretending Trump won. Nothing happens. You take it far enough that you forge documents trying to make it seem like Trump won. Nothing happens. You form one of these election audits, one of these reviews of the election results. Nothing happens. Even though the taxpayers are paying for the thing, you staff it entirely with super Trump loyalists who have literally already sued to overturn the election, who have led Stop the Steal rallies, who are publicly committed to the cause of falsifying the results and reinstalling Trump. You staff the taxpayer-funded audit entirely with people like that. But still, you're still getting away with it. Nothing happens. Well, why wouldn't you see how far you can push it? Why wouldn't you try to arrest elections officials? Why wouldn't you try to arrest mayors in Democratic cities? I mean, you've gotten this far and nothing's happened to you. Why wouldn't you just keep going? Keep pushing it.
It is Wednesday, the 22nd of December of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? No one. Well, I came across some, sort of good news in terms of the arc of our body politic. Right-wing theocratic types are coming for a school board near you, but parents are fighting back. I think they've had quite enough. Quite. Though, at the same time, right-wing extremists like the Proud Boys, 3%ers, those types, they're coming, or will continue to come for a school board near you. But they're not going to be praying for your eternal soul. At least they might have. I think it's called a prevarication prayer. They might be having one of those, but that's not for the goodness of your being. It's for something quite final indeed. And I always like it when they use all this violent rhetoric like Jesse Waters did against Fauci, and then immediately like a little Trumpenjungen Nazis like Madison Cawthorn come out on the transoms and say, hey, there's always the extreme left that take this to the extreme. We're not talking for people to really do it, and yet people do it continuously. But, you know, this guy's a little Nazi. He's already said he wants a civil war, and he thinks that they will win. Well, you know, they've sort of stacked the game a bit, haven't they? Made sure that they got possession of as many weapons as possible under the aegis of the Second Amendment. I have a right to bear arms against my government. No, you don't. No, you don't. And I think that's the point that we need to start drawing the proverbial line in the sand. No one is buying these guns to go hunting. No one is buying these guns because they're collectors. They're buying these guns to kill human beings, and the human beings they want to kill are, you from the government? You better not come across that gate there. Government. In fact, they're not even waiting for the government to come through their gate. They themselves are going to go through their gates and go down to the city center and shoot it up to get what they want. They're going to follow 65, 75-year-old volunteer election worker women home, surround their homes with guns and lights, Klieg lights. It's not Antifa. And yet, Antifa gets blamed for everything. Well, you know, these are the same people that put down vaccines and tell you to eat horse paste and bleach. Let's drink it from a communal bowl. Yes. We'll call it Guyana Guava. I bet you do. So, Christmas is upon us. It's supposed to be, a season of joy and mirth. The bringing into the world of good cheer. Goodwill towards all. Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not having a Christmas truce with a bunch of Nazis. I am sorry. They have gone far enough, and they continue to go. Even though they've gone far enough, they're continuing to go even further. What's the old adage? Give a rat a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. This is exactly what Rachel was alluding to when she said that there is something metastasized in Wisconsin. No one is held to account for committing a felony. Forged documents sent across state lines, by the way, that makes it a federal felony. Once they sent the fraudulent forged documents to the president of the Senate, you know who that is. The one that everybody wanted to hang. Once they did that, makes it a federal felony. No one held to account. And now these insurgents want to arrest Democratic mayors. They're going to search for election fraud. They're going to find that Trump voters voted more than once, twice, 3, 4 times even. But that's enough to arrest the Democratic mayors and volunteer election workers and flip the election. Put lead in the water. Well, that's where we are. Okay, well, since we had such a long clip from Rachel, why don't we break down what we have here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we start off on this fabulous Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. An information technology contractor will pay the federal government almost $1.4 million to settle allegations that it overbilled NASA. For hours and materials, my God. Trump's USDA overpaid corn farmers by $3 billion in 2019 alone. And the Secret Service reported nearly $100 billion at minimum has been stolen from COVID-19 relief programs. Guess what? Overseas actors. Someone's declared war on the U.S. Anybody helping those people? Yeah, the T word. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced he will defy the European Union's High Court ruling on asylum. And he's not violating the order to allow more asylum seekers in. No, it's not that. And Canada's housing minister said the country should rezone cities and temporarily ban foreign home buyers. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really helps us pay our bills and fly under the radar. Yeah, we do that. We've been doing that for quite a while. And when you fly under the radar, you get away with a lot of things. And how do we fly under the radar? Well, once again, it's because we pay our bills. But also, we have to continuously upgrade and replace machinery, hardware. And continuously upgrade to newer and newer versions of software. Why do they do that? Planned obsolescence, that's why. But we have to live in this dimension, and so therefore we do pay our bills. And so that we are able to resist this hostile takeover of the United States of America by actors foreign and domestic, who seem to be in cahoots. I wonder why? Because they are. Well, we've arrayed our forces, and we will not let it happen, and we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty in this time of woe. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio, I forgot to mention, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send that to us once a month, we will be able to pay those said bills. We will be able to fly under said radar. And we will be able to continue to resist said hostile takeover of the United States of America in this said time of woe. Okay. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, and who doesn't? Well, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter because the show notes and links are quite important because that's where the real reportage is, indeed. And then I also get it linked up on other social media platforms. You know who they are. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. They're all over. Okay. Oh, little update on the little Yorkshire poodle Ginger, the old gal of the house here. Went in for her patella knee surgery. And apparently she has really bad colitis, and they can't really do the surgery until they clear that up. So we picked her up. I picked her up. It would be nice to have a crew to come with me, but that's just the way it is. I am my own crew most of the time. Well, I went and picked her up, got copious amounts of even more medicine, because she does have medicine for her congestive heart issues. But the suspicion is, and I got to say this a little quiet because my mom likes to feed the dogs people food. And I'm trying to get my English bulldog, Gunner here, the snoozing sous chef. Well, I got to tell you, he has become a porker. So it's a little hard to regulate and maintain their diet when they're getting food surreptitiously fed to them that they should not be having. So the suspicion is that my suspicion is that Ginger got fed some wild rice, and the black grain that's in there, that's not rice. That's not wild rice. That's what they call it, wild rice, but it's a wild wheatgrass. And so that has pointy edges on it, and that could have been the issue. So we'll see. Right now, we have a couple of weeks of trying to get the flare-up subsided so that she can get the surgery that she needs so she won't be a three-legged dog. Oh, darn little thing. Anyway, so she's home, and we were going to pick her up today late if she had gone through the patella surgery. So it's going to be put off, and of course, because of the pandemic and restriction protocols and whatnot, the vet is a little backed up. So hopefully we'll get in there and things will be expedited. We'll get put on the call when cancel list. So it could be a lot sooner than what we might expect now. So that's the update on little Ginger, the old gal in the house. Alrighty. This first offering, though, here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by staff at the Associated Press. A Virginia-based information technology contractor will pay the federal government almost $1.4 million to resolve allegations that it overbilled NASA for hours worked and labor rates in excess of the actual charges, a prosecutor said Tuesday. Well, I would say that it wasn't just time and material, or I would say it would also be time and materials, but that's just me. U.S. Attorney for Maryland, Eric L. Barron, said in a news release that Telophase Corporation agreed to the payment to resolve federal False Claims Act allegations. Telophase provides a variety of services, including information technology and cybersecurity services. It was awarded a subcontract for services to be provided to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The specific contract reimburses the contractor for actual project costs plus a fee. According to the news release, between April 1st of 2016 and December 31st of 2018, wow. I wonder who was the president the bulk of those years. I just can't remember. Well, Telophase submitted false claims to NASA by billing the space agency for labor hours in excess of the hours that Telophase could show that its employees and contractors actually worked. It's also alleged that the company charged labor rates higher than the rates actually paid to its employees and contractors. Telophase was also accused of charging labor costs in excess of its actual recorded costs and indirect rates that were higher than those actually incurred, the news release said. David Pitt of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The Trump administration overpaid corn farmers by about $3 billion in federal aid in 2019, and farmers in the South were paid more for the same crops than those elsewhere in the country, a federal watchdog agency has found. The Government Accountability Office, that federal watchdog agency, said in a report released on Monday that international disputes resulting from tariffs imposed by Trump hurt farmers, but that the U.S. Department of Agriculture's county-by-county methodology for computing the extent of the damage was flawed, leading to overpayment and inconsistent compensation. Though corn yields are higher in the Midwest and West, corn producers received an estimated average of $69 per acre in the South, $61 in the Midwest, $34 in the Northeast, and $29 in the West because that's where the Democrats live. GAO also estimated that payments to corn producers were approximately $3 billion more than the USDA's estimate of trade damage to corn, while payments to soybeans, sorghum, and cotton producers were lower than their estimated trade damages. National Corn Growers Association CEO John Doggett said the USDA's higher compensation for corn farmers in 2019 included items the GAO did not consider in its analysis, including the trade damage value for corn ethanol, and a high-protein livestock feed byproduct of ethanol production. Really? Sounds like a lot of bullshit to me. The GAO report was requested by Senate Agriculture Committee chaired by Michigan Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. This report confirms that the Trump USDA picked winners and losers in their trade aid programs and left everyone else behind, Stabenow said in a statement, making larger payments to farmers in the South than farmers in the Midwest or elsewhere, regardless of whether those farmers actually experienced a larger loss, undermines our future ability to support farmers when real disasters occur. Jennifer McDermott of the AP brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Nearly $1 billion at minimum has been stolen from COVID-19 relief programs set up to help businesses and people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic, the U.S. Secret Service said yesterday, Tuesday. The estimate is based on Secret Service cases and data from the Labor Department and the Small Business Administration, said Roy Dotson, the agency's National Pandemic Fraud Recovery Coordinator, in an interview. The Secret Service did not include COVID-19 fraud cases prosecuted by the Justice Department. While roughly 3% of the $3.4 trillion dispersed, the amount stolen from pandemic benefits programs shows the sheer size of the pot is enticing to the criminals, Dotson said. Most of the figure comes from unemployment fraud. The Labor Department reported about $87 billion in unemployment benefits could have been paid improperly, with a significant portion attributable to fraud. The Secret Service said it has seized more than $1.2 billion while investigating unemployment insurance and loan fraud, and has returned more than $2.3 billion of the fraudulently obtained funds by working with financial partners and states to reverse transactions. The Secret Service says it has more than 900 active criminal investigations into pandemic fraud, with cases in every state, and 100 people have been arrested so far. The Justice Department said last week that its fraud section had prosecuted over 150 defendants in more than 95 criminal cases and seized over $75 million in cash derived from fraudulently obtained Paycheck Protection Program funds, as well as numerous real estate properties and luxury items purchased with the proceeds. Law enforcement early in the pandemic focused on fraud related to personal protective equipment, the Secret Service said. Authorities have now prioritized the exploitation of pandemic-related relief because the federal funding through the CARES Act attracted the attention of individuals and organized criminal networks worldwide. Can we stop the fraud? Will we? No. But I think we can definitely prosecute those that need to be prosecuted, and we can do our best to recover as much fraudulent pandemic funds that we can, said Dotson, who is the Secret Service's Assistant Special Agent in charge of the agency's field office in Jacksonville, Florida. Well, that brings us to our break. And why don't we? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Rawhide. To gain Oscar eligibility, Netflix has done a limited theater release for Jane Campion's first feature in 12 years, The Power of the Dog. Named for a verse in a psalm Jesus supposedly mentioned on the cross, this one, like her The Piano in the underseen series Top of the Lake, is a slow build concentrating on character development. And what a character we get to watch here. Phil, a macho yet Yale-educated ranch hand, more by choice since he's also the ranch's part owner, is brought off with scary intensity by Benedict Cumberbatch. Phil has a staid brother, George, a sister-in-law, the sensitive Rose, Kirsten Dunst, and then there's Rose's creepy son, Peter. But most of all, Phil has a secret. It's mid-1920s Montana, and as Phil's behavior maybe suggests, he's aware of and motivated by a disconnect. He breaks horses and castrates bulls in a snap. He torments his brother, even more so Rose, but especially Peter. But we see Phil in the woods, swimming naked, alone, and we get to see his stash of bodybuilding magazines, and we get to know a sort of unseen character, Bronco Henry, a long-dead ranching mentor for whom he maintains a shrine, and whose handkerchief, disturbingly, he still carries. By the third act, we're not surprised by Phil's sudden change of heart towards Peter, something which definitely can't be said about the bizarre conclusion. Campion and cinematographer Ari Wegner contrast the claustrophobic with the big sky and shoot through objects and portals for effect as the characters find their disquieting places. Thomas Savage's novel, The Power of the Dog, may have been more revolutionary when released in 1967, but as a portrait of a tortured soul and the human vortex around him, the movie more than stands up. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hello, 60-Second Science listeners. I'm Katie Hafner, and I'm the host of a new podcast called Lost Women of Science. I've been writing about science and technology for decades, most of that time for the New York Times, but very rarely did I write about a woman who was a major figure. I don't remember it bothering me very much at the time. It just seemed normal. I believed I was writing about the most important people in their fields. But it became clear, as my career went on, that important figures were missing, namely, women. I started asking why this was a couple of years ago, and I kept coming back to something called the Matilda Effect, which is basically a bias against acknowledging women for their work in science. Instead, the credit goes to a man. A good example I saw in the news recently is Jocelyn Bell Burnell. She's a radio astronomer who discovered the first two pulsars. But the Nobel Prize went to a man. If we don't catch these misattributions, these women can just fade away from our consciousness, and we'll never know the truth about their story and about our history. I started this podcast to retrieve these scientists from oblivion. We put together a trailer for the series, and here it is. I'm Katie Hafner, host of a new podcast called Lost Women of Science. Through history, women have made hundreds of scientific breakthroughs.
She had a sixth sense about this disease that enabled her to sort of pick out, I think, important clues.
She was helpful in a very different, unnoticed way.
She put this puzzle together.
But many, if not most, of these scientists are missing from the public's consciousness.
And as I added up all this data in my head, it gradually became clear that her place had been ignored.
Each season, we'll explore and celebrate the life and work of one woman who shaped our understanding of the world. And we'll delve into some of the reasons you might not know her name.
I mean, why is it that Rosalind Franklin wasn't given credit for her contributions to the discovery of the structure of DNA? I think it's the same type of thing.
We'll be looking at the obstacles these women faced, but also their passion, their drive, their sheer perseverance. We're revisiting the historical record, one extraordinary scientist at a time.
But I finally figured out, wait a second, there's an alternative story here.
Join us as we unearth these remarkable untold stories. Lost Women of Science, coming November 4th, wherever you get your podcasts. Getting to these stories requires lots of digging. We at Lost Women of Science go searching in archives, in museums, in hospitals, in people's basements, to piece these people's lives back together after they've been neglected for many, many decades. Our first season is about a pathologist named Dorothy Anderson, the first person to identify cystic fibrosis in a patient in the 1930s. Her work is the foundation for the treatments available for the disease today. In the Lost Women of Science podcast, we break down the science and we try to figure out who these people were and what the world around them was like then. It's like a science podcast meets a period piece, meets a mystery. The more I do this research, the more I realize that women were at the heart of some of the most important developments in science. A couple of examples. In the early 1900s, Alice Ball, a young black chemist, came up with the most effective treatment for leprosy. And the work of Katalin Karikó, a Hungarian biochemist, has been crucial to the development of the Pfizer and Moderna COVID vaccines. Please join us here at Scientific American or wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Lost Women of Science, and you'll find us.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
This special day got me to thinking about America's spirit of giving. And I don't mean this overdone business of Christmas gifts. I mean our true spirit of giving, giving of ourselves. Yes, we are a country of rugged individualists, yet there's also a deep community-minded streak in each of us. We're a people who believe in the notion that we're all in this together, that we can make our individual lives better by contributing to the common good. The establishment media pay little attention to grassroots generosity, focusing instead on the occasional showy donation by what it calls philanthropists, big tycoons who give a little piece of their billions to some university or museum in exchange for getting a building named after them. But in my mind, the real philanthropists are the millions of you ordinary folks who have precious little money to give, but consistently give of themselves, and do it without demanding that their name be engraved on a granite wall. My own daddy, rest his soul, was a fine example of this. With half a dozen other guys in Denison, Texas, he started the Little League baseball program, volunteering to build the park, sponsor and coach the teams, run the squawking PA system, etc., etc. Even after I graduated from Little League, Daddy stayed working at it because his involvement was not merely for his own kids, but for all. He felt the same way about being taxed to build a public library in town. I don't recall him ever going in that building, much less checking out a book, but he wanted it to be there for the community, and he was happy to pay his part. Not that he was a do-good liberal, for God's sake. Indeed, he called himself a conservative. This is Jim Hightower saying, my daddy didn't even know he had a political philosophy, but he did, and it's the best I've ever heard. He would often say to me, everybody does better when everybody does better. If only Washington and Wall Street would begin practicing this true American philosophy.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The American colonies can be divided into 3 regions: New England, the Middle Colonies, and the Southern Colonies. At the time of American independence in 1776, the New England colonies were Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Present-day New England also includes the states of Vermont and Maine, but at the time of independence, Vermont was part of New Hampshire, and Maine was part of Massachusetts. The economy of the New England colonies was characterized by fishing, shipbuilding, logging, fur trapping, and trading, and small-scale farming. The New England colonies were rich in natural resources, particularly fish, furs, and timber, but farming was generally carried out on small independent farms that provided only enough food for the family. New England was home to some of the first of England's colonies in the New World. Some of these colonies succeeded, but some did not last long. One successful colony was in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which the Pilgrims established in 1620. It later merged into the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which claimed a large swath of territory that includes present-day Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Many New England colonists were fleeing religious persecution in England. Like the Pilgrims, Roger Williams was a Puritan who immigrated to America. Puritans were a Protestant religious group that disagreed with the Church of England on important matters of faith. However, Williams was himself expelled from Massachusetts for his political and religious beliefs and founded the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, which today is the state of Rhode Island. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2008. That was the day that Walmart stores agreed to settle 63 wage and hour lawsuits across 42 states for at least $352 million and possibly as much as $640 million. Walmart and Sam's Clubs were accused of failing to pay overtime, requiring workers to work off the clock, erasing hours from time cards, and preventing workers from taking meal and rest breaks as guaranteed by state law. The lawsuits involved hundreds of thousands of then current and former employees. You'd think they would have learned their lesson after having to shell out that amount of money. In fact, they have had to settle at least 7 more class action wage and hour lawsuits and remain a defendant in dozens more. By 2012, Walmart had settled at least 9 Equal Employment Opportunity Commission cases related to disability, gender, racial and religious discrimination in hiring, and sexual harassment. Egregious labor violations have persisted throughout their stores. Systematic wage theft, health and safety dangers, and abusive conditions on the job have continued for years. Chronic short staffing creates unsafe working conditions. In 2012 alone, they were repeatedly cited and fined by OSHA for serious violations such as blocked emergency exits, lack of safety procedures for control of power hazards, and other problems. Employees who worked with our Walmart organizers often found they were targeted with threats, reduction in hours, and terminations. More recently, Walmart has had to settle a discrimination suit over health insurance benefits for same-sex spouses. The high cost of labor violations and the low wages at Walmart cost taxpayers on average $6.2 billion a year in public assistance for many of their workers.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Our snoozing sous chef is doing a job here. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only about 42 or so, cloudy with periods of rain, winds light and variable, expecting about 1/4 of an inch during the daytime, and then lows tonight in the low 40s and periods of rain, winds light and variable, and about another 1/4 of an inch of rain, and another 1/4 of an inch tomorrow with highs in the low 40s. We have updates now for confirmed cases in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon, which now stands at 258,071, and our deceased has increased by another 10 and stands at 380. Pollen is rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 38 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.94 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 41 degrees and fair. Paris is 32 and cloudy. Rome is 54 and sunny. Kyiv is 16 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 40 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 63 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 43 degrees and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 72 degrees and merely cloudy. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees with showers in the vicinity. And New York, New York is 42 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Justin Spike of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hungary will not change its immigration policies despite a recent ruling from the European Union's top court that found them in contradiction with the bloc's laws, Prime Minister Viktor Orban said yesterday, Tuesday. Orban's announcement came as Hungary's anti-immigration government is locked in a dispute with the EU over the bloc's jurisdiction over the affairs of its 27 members, especially concerning his government's policies on immigration and LGBT issues. A ruling last year by the EU Court of Justice found that Hungary had failed to respect EU law by conducting pushbacks of people entering the country without authorization, denying them the right to apply for asylum, and detaining them in transit zones along Hungary's southern border with Serbia. But during a rare news conference in Budapest, the right-wing populist Orban insisted that Hungary would continue its migration policies and that it does not matter what the European Court ruled. Hungary must continue to defend its borders, Orban sneered. We decided that we will not do anything to change the way the border is protected, he continued, sneering. We won't change it, and we aren't going to let anyone in.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Julie Gordon of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Municipalities should rezone broadly to allow more density, and Canada should temporarily ban foreign buyers to alleviate the housing affordability crunch faced by residents, the country's housing minister said yesterday, Tuesday. Ahmed Hussein told Reuters in an interview that housing should be for Canadians to live in, not passive foreign investment, and that he backs Canadian cities implementing density measures like those recently rolled out in New Zealand, which allow up to 3 homes to be built on most single-family lots. I support that, he said. That's one of the ways to easily increase housing supply by using the same land for single-family dwelling and creating more units. Canada is grappling with a national housing crisis as surging demand tied to the COVID-19 pandemic has sprawled beyond big cities and into smaller centers which are unable to keep up with supply. Trudeau, who won his third term in September, has promised new measures to improve housing affordability, including a temporary ban on foreign buyers and 1.4 million new or refurbished homes over 4 years. Huson said he supports the foreign buyer ban, but did not provide any details on how and when it would be implemented. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. Oh yes, it's the eve of Christmas Eve. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.